At 3:46 a.m., just minutes before armed assassins stormed the presidential compound, Captain Ibrahim Traoré vanished into the darkness, escorted only by 12 loyal soldiers and a mission no one saw coming. In a land where over 10,000 civilians had already perished under waves of insurgent violence, where aid came with strings and survival came with silence, one man chose defiance over diplomacy. He didn't beg. He traded gold for missiles. But this isn't just a story of weapons. It's a story of power reclaimed, of silence turned into sovereignty. Because when a forgotten nation dares to say enough, and when the world turns its back sometimes, that nation turns its face to the fire and fights back. The story you're about to witness blends fact with fiction. While characters, events, and conversations have been dramatized, the emotions, the injustice, and the hunger for dignity, those are painfully real. Now ask yourself, what if the only way to survive is to stop asking permission? Let's begin. Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, 3:46 a.m. The sky was black velvet. No moon, no stars, just a strange electric stillness, like the air itself was holding its breath. Then came the first explosion. A thunderous boom shattered the silence, turning windows into knives and alarms into screams. The presidential district lit up into strobes of orange and flame as a convoy of black, unmarked trucks smashed through the outer gates of the Kaluba compound, the fortified heart of Burkina Faso's power. Inside, the guards never stood a chance. One was shot before he even reached his rifle. Another, just 19, tried to send out a distress code, but his fingers were trembling too hard. The keypad blinked red. Too late. A flashbang cracked beside him, and everything turned to smoke. They came fast, brutal, precise. 8 men, black gear, no flags, no words, only one order. Find Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Eliminate. Burn the tapes. Leave nothing behind. Across the street, inside the darkened command van, a voice crackled over comms. Alpha 1, target room is empty. He's gone. Silence, then came the reply, cold and quiet. Repeat? I said, the eagle has flown. A pause, and then, through clenched teeth, find him. Now. Cut 2, 30 minutes earlier. Inside the compound, the lights were already off. No footsteps echoed. No radios buzzed. Just a dim corridor where a shadow moved. Not in fear, but with purpose. Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't run. He walked. Wearing a sand-colored combat uniform, the same kind as men wore in the northern trenches, Traoré wasn't hiding. He was preparing. By his side, Colonel Bako, his most trusted aide, handed him a sealed case. Sir, the goal routes are clear. Extraction team is waiting. Traoré didn't answer right away. He looked up at a wall covered in black and white photos, portraits of fallen soldiers. His fingers grazed one frame, eyes unreadable. 12 of us, he said quietly, against the world. Then he turned. Let's give the world a reason to regret. Outside, extraction zone Zulu. 2 armored jeeps waited in a narrow alley, engines cold. Traoré emerged from a rear tunnel beneath the compound, flanked by 11 hand-picked operatives, men and women who owed nothing to anyone but the soil beneath their boots. A drone passed overhead, then another. Civilian models, watching, recording. They'll know you're gone by dawn, Bako warned. Good, Traoré said. Let them wonder. Back inside the palace, minutes later, the strike team swept room by room, each one empty. No laptop, no briefcase, the bed undisturbed, as if Traoré had never existed. But one thing remained, a single bullet left on his desk, unfired, standing upright. Next to it, a note. I don't waste ammunition. The team leader stared at it, pulse ticking. Who leaves a calling card during an escape? This wasn't flight. This was theater. Across town, makeshift command center General Ouattara, who had authorized the operation from a hotel 3 miles away, was now pacing. His hand trembled slightly as he lit his 4th cigarette of the hour. The cameras, hacked and looped, still showed an empty bedroom. Where the hell is he? He spat. An aide approached with a tablet. Sir, we found footage. He boarded a private bird, headed northeast. The general paused, eyes narrowing. Northeast? That's not a hiding place. That's a message. He looked at the screen again. Traoré in full military dress, stepping into a plane. No coat, no entourage, no hesitation. He wasn't running. He was advancing, somewhere in the desert, before sunrise. The plane cut low across the Sahel, hugging the landscape like a ghost. No beacons, no call sign. In the cabin, the air was quiet except for the hum of fate. Traoré sat alone near the rear, staring out into the void. In his lap, a metal briefcase, locked. Inside, enough state secrets, in raw gold, to rewrite the nation's story. A young soldier sitting across from him finally broke the silence. "Sir, where are we going?" Traoré didn't blink. "To where they never expected us to go." A long pause. Then softly, "To Moscow." The engines roared low and steady, just enough to drown out the wind tearing through the open desert. A convoy of 3 armored vehicles tore across the Sahel in formation. No headlights, no insignia, just silhouettes slicing through the early dawn. Dust whipped in violent swirls behind them, painting the horizon in pale gold and ghost gray. In the second vehicle, shielded by reinforced glass and plated steel, Captain Ibrahim Traoré sat in silence. Arms crossed, back straight, eyes fixed on the nothingness ahead. He wasn't talking. He wasn't blinking. He was calculating. Opposite him sat Corporal Diallo, the youngest in the extraction unit, his rifle across his knees and sweat crawling down his temples despite the cool night air. He stole a glance at the captain, then finally spoke, not loud but clear. "Sir, was this the plan?" "All of it." Traoré didn't answer right away. He reached into the pouch strapped across his chest, pulled out a folded piece of paper, creased at the corners, fingerprinted with dust. He held it for a moment before handing it to Diallo. Diallo unfolded it slowly. Inside were names, 12 of them, all circled in red, some marked with X, others with question mark. Officers, advisors, men he recognized from the compound, men still wearing the uniform. "They were in the room with me," Traoré said quietly, not looking at him, "drinking tea, laughing, talking about logistics for the new patrol zones." Diallo swallowed hard. "Traitors?" "Not all," Traoré replied, "but enough. One of them passed information, our drone shipment schedule, our extraction routes, even the location of my quarters." The corporal stared at the list again, then back at his commander. "How did you know?" That's when the flashback began. Quiet, eerie, claustrophobic. The night before, Traoré had been called to a discreet meeting by Colonel Bako, not at headquarters, but in a dilapidated warehouse at the city's edge. Inside, a dim light, a battered laptop, and the grainy footage of an intercepted message. Encrypted, but not enough to hide the voice. "Operation Eclipse confirmed. Target must not leave alive." The timestamp, 20 minutes before midnight. The sender? Unconfirmed, but the recipient was one of their own. Traoré said nothing for nearly a full minute. Then he rose from the crate he was sitting on, rolled down the sleeves of his fatigues, and asked only one question. "Is the northern vault secure?" Bako nodded. "The gold's been moved. 2 unmarked trucks, heading to Zinyare tonight. We keep them moving." And just like that, the pieces snapped together. The departure, the convoy, the plane. It wasn't an escape. It was execution of a decision made long before the first bullet ever fired. Back in the present, Traoré leaned forward slightly, eyes still locked on the endless road. "This isn't panic, Diallo. It's repositioning." The corporal nodded slowly, then glanced outside, where the sun had just begun to peek over the edge of the land, turning the sand a burning orange. Their tracks stretched behind them like scars. Every minute that passed put them farther from betrayal and closer to something that hadn't existed in their country for generations. Leverage. Traoré finally broke the silence again, softer this time. "They think we're running. They always think Africans run. From war, from power, from truth." He looked directly at Diallo now. His voice sharpened. "But we're not running. We're moving toward the one place they never imagined we'd go. The one place they can't control." Diallo hesitated, then asked, "Russia?" A slight smile broke across the captain's face, not of triumph, but of inevitability. Not Russia, he said. Reckoning. And with that, the convoy surged forward into the waking desert, three shadows carrying a secret no satellite could detect, no treaty could prevent, and no empire could afford to ignore. The war room wasn't in a palace, or a military base, or even an official building. It was buried beneath an abandoned textile factory on the outskirts of Ouagadougou, a place that reeked of grease, dust, and history long forgotten. A single fluorescent bulb flickered above the steel table where Captain Ibrahim Traoré sat, hunched over a document that had already rewritten everything he believed about loyalty. The paper was worn, smudged at the edges from too many hands, and in the center was a list, not long, not anonymous. Names, ranks, units. All of them men he had once trusted. Some he had trained, some had trained him. And beside each name was a mark, either a red X or a yellow question mark. Death or doubt. 13 names total. 13 fractures in the chain of command that nearly ended him just hours ago. Colonel Bako stood behind him, arms crossed tightly, watching his commander more than the list. No one spoke for nearly a minute. Only the hum of generators in the background reminded them time hadn't stopped. Traoré didn't frown. He didn't curse. He didn't rage. His voice, when it came, was quieter than expected. Cold, low, but heavy like lead. Tonight, he said slowly, they tried to kill a man. He stood up, pushing the chair back with a screech, his hand pressed against the table, not out of weakness, but control. Tomorrow, we kill the system. Bako shifted. Orders. Burn every access code. Change all logistics rotations. No one moves without face-to-face clearance. And the names? Traoré looked up, eyes unreadable. The ones with red X's. Detain. Interrogate if necessary. If they resist, we cut. Bako hesitated for a second. And the question marks? Watch them. Let them think they've survived. Then we'll see what loyalty looks like under heat. As the colonel moved to relay instructions, Traoré stayed behind, staring down at the list once more. One name near the top caught his eye, General Nabakone. He had known him since his academy days, shared bread, bunked in tents, fought together in the north. And yet there he was, marked with an X, not by suspicion, by proof. Surveillance had caught him entering the French diplomatic enclave twice in 1 week. No explanation, no record, no loyalty. Traoré didn't sigh. He simply folded the paper in half, then again, until it was small enough to fit into his jacket pocket. It wasn't just a list, it was a verdict. A distant knock on the steel hatch signaled the convoy was ready. Bako returned, nodding once. Your flight is wheels up in 15. We're cleared through Niger, rerouting at Al Jufra. There'll be no radar trail. Traoré adjusted his jacket. The desert dust still clung to his boots. He picked up a sealed case, the same one he carried from the compound. Its weight not just gold, but gravity. As he approached the hatch, he paused. They'll say this is treason, he murmured. Bako replied, only until we win. Outside, the night stretched wide and windless. A lone aircraft waited in the dark. Matte black, cold, faceless. Traoré climbed the ramp without fanfare, without farewell. Behind him, the factory lights dimmed one by one until the city disappeared into silence. Inside the plane, he sat alone, the case beside him, the list still warm in his pocket. No aides, no press, no politics, just a man heading east, with a plan to never return the same. The room was colder than the Russian winter outside. Thick stone walls, high ceilings, no chandeliers, no gold trim, just steel beams, faded war maps, and a silence that carried more weight than the furniture. A single overhead lamp cast a dull yellow glow onto the long table below, where three men sat in silence. One of them was Captain Ibrahim Traoré. He wore his full Burkina combat uniform, dusty from travel, sleeves neatly rolled, no medals, just a flag patch and a gaze that refused to blink. Across from him sat Yuri Mirov, a senior advisor in Russia's Defense Intelligence Wing. Older, lean, with cold eyes and a voice that didn't need to rise to make a room fall quiet. Next to him, a technician, A silent man in a charcoal suit laid out schematic blueprints and satellite renderings. No press, no translators, no interpreters. Just men who already understood what words alone could not express. Traoré placed the briefcase on the table with a quiet click. Two guards moved to stop him. Mirov raised a single finger. They froze. The case opened. Inside, glistening beneath the dull light, were 17 gold ingots, freshly smelted, stamped with the national seal of Burkina Faso. Pure, untouched. The silence in the room stretched taut. No contracts, no loans, no IMF, Traoré said flatly. Only this. Mirov leaned forward, steepling his fingers. You're not here for help, he said, voice calm, almost amused. You're here for a war machine. Traoré didn't respond. He slid forward a second folder. Inside, a meticulously mapped overlay of northern Burkina Faso, rebel movements, weak points in current air defense, zones lost to insurgents. It was detailed, brutal, and precise. We don't need to match them in numbers, Traoré said, tapping a red zone on the map. We need to blind them, then strike before they even know they're being watched. Mirov nodded slowly. Drones, air dominance, reconnaissance, strike capability, Turkish Akinci, Bayraktar TB2S. But I want Russian brains inside the targeting systems. I want heat-seeking eyes that don't miss. The technician opened a second case. Inside were the specifications for a surveillance and targeting package developed during the Syrian campaign. Traoré scanned it without flinching. That'll do. Mirov raised an eyebrow. And for ground? Traoré was already pulling another folder from his coat. It contained specs for Serbian Nora B-52 howitzers, Chinese MRAPs, and Romanian-built mobile firebases. We need platforms that can shoot, move, and vanish. Fast deployment. 105mm cannon capacity. Thermal shielding. You've studied, Mirov muttered. I've survived, Traoré corrected. There was a pause. Mirov looked at the gold, then at Traoré. Most leaders come here asking for assurances, for protection, for alliances. He leaned forward, his voice lowering like a blade unsheathed. You come with maps, firepower, and a threat matrix. Traoré nodded. I'm not building a defense line. I'm building a doctrine. Mirov smiled faintly, then stood. We don't deal in dreams, but for that much gold, we'll sell you silence that kills. He turned to the technician. Assemble the package, full scope, rush schedule, no customs trail. Traoré rose to his feet. And logistics? We'll ship to a dummy port in Guinea. From there, your men take over. Good, Traoré said, and without another word, closed the briefcase of gold and extended his hand. Not as a plea, but as a transaction. Mirov shook it. As Traoré turned to leave, Mirov called after him. One last thing, Captain. Traoré paused. When you return home with this, what will you tell the world? Traoré didn't look back. That we stopped selling our soul and started buying back our future. And with that, he disappeared into the corridors of the Kremlin, leaving only silence, schematics, and 17 bars of gold behind him. Payment not for power, but for the right to wield it without asking permission. It began before dawn, quiet, clinical, and far from public eyes. Somewhere near Ziniare, beneath an open stretch of scrubland massed as farmland, two canvas-covered trucks waited with engines humming. Their payload, 3.2 metric tons of raw gold, freshly extracted, unregistered, and still smelling of earth. Soldiers stood watch in absolute silence, their boots sinking slightly in the morning dew. A mechanic double-checked the reinforced suspension, while another adjusted the camouflage netting over the containers. When the first shaft of sunlight hit the crates, the gold caught the light for only a second, then vanished under darkness again. Meanwhile, thousands of kilometers away, in a dimly lit hangar near Konya, Turkey, 6 engineers surrounded a long metallic fuselage. The stenciled letters on the side were unmistakable. Bayraktar TB2. The drone's wings were being affixed with high-precision guidance systems, its undercarriage fitted with MAML smart micro-munitions. Technicians whispered instructions in Turkish. One tapped a monitor, target acquisition grid loaded. Another held up a heat-sensitive camera and attached it to the nose. No one spoke above a murmur. They knew who this was for, and they knew why. Across the Black Sea in Serbia, a military rail depot hissed with the sound of hydraulic arms locking down a massive artillery piece. Painted in matte sand brown, its side bore the marking NORA B-52 M 21 155mm howitzer, long-range configuration. Nearby, a stack of crates labeled Burkina private export were being bolted shut. Inside, firing computers, recoil systems, and shell casings marked anti-fortification use only. Further east, in a weapons assembly facility just outside Beijing, Chinese defense workers moved in coordinated efficiency. A row of MRAPs, mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, sat gleaming under halogen floodlights. Each was fitted with a V-shaped hull, bulletproof glass, blast-proof doors. On the dashboard of one, a placard read, Desert Operations Package, Burkina Faso, Delivery Code, Sable 9. Nearby, a drone surveillance system, built for wide-area tracking and signal interception, was being tested on a training loop. A technician glanced at the screen and muttered, "They won't hide from this." Back in Burkina Faso, the gold convoy moved, at a crawl first, down unmarked roads guarded by masked soldiers. Then with more speed as they joined a protected military route. Above, a chopper scanned the trail with thermal optics. The cargo was too precious to lose, not just in value but in what it represented. A declaration that Burkina Faso would no longer buy freedom with apologies, only with assets. At a private airstrip west of Ouagadougou, an unmarked Ilyushin 76 transport plane waited. Its cargo bay gaped open like the mouth of a steel beast. As the trucks reversed into place, loaders snapped into position. Inside the hold, crates were already being offloaded from a previous stop, containers from Serbia and Romania. Printed in large black stencils, Bayraktar TB2 do not drop. Nora B-52 barrel component, sealed. Chinese MRAP, ambush ready. Traoré stood nearby, arms folded, watching each crate roll out like puzzle pieces falling into place. A logistics officer approached with a manifest. Traoré scanned it, nodded once. "What about the drones?" ETA, 48 hours. One shipment via Guinea, one via Algeria. No paper trail. "Good." He turned back to the aircraft. In his eyes, there was no hesitation, only recognition. This wasn't just a deal. It was the architecture of deterrence. The final crate was sealed. The gold was inside now, nestled between shells and sensors, wrapped in steel and strategy. As the plane's ramp lifted and locked, the engines roared awake. And just like that, the skies above Africa shifted. Because while the world still saw Burkina Faso as a country in crisis, something else had begun to take form, quietly, methodically, and with gold in its veins. Not just survival, structure, firepower, intent. And behind it all, one man's refusal to kneel. The footage was 37 seconds long, shaky, captured from a local news station, but clear enough to make the air freeze in every cafe, kiosk, and military barrack across West Africa. A dark-suited ECOWAS spokesman stood at a podium in Abuja, Nigeria, reading a statement with all the gravity of a courtroom verdict. "Effective immediately, we demand the unconditional resignation of Captain Ibrahim Traoré from any and all positions of national authority. Burkina Faso must return to constitutional order or face economic and military isolation." The screen cut back to the anchor, clearly rattled, trying to explain what sanctions could follow. Behind the camera, someone whispered, "They really think he's just going to leave?" He didn't. Within hours, a response was issued. Not from a press secretary, not through a tweet, but from Traoré himself, live on national television, seated before the Burkina flag, in his combat uniform, eyes locked directly into the lens. There was no teleprompter, no translator, only truth, spoken without apology. "I hear them say I must step down, that what we've done is unlawful. That order must be restored. But I ask them this, what order are they speaking of? The one where French troops patrol our streets while our children die in the north? The one where gold leaves our soil in private jets while our soldiers share bullets?" He leaned forward. "France calls it mutiny. I call it independence. Those words rang through the capital like thunder. That night, no shots were fired, but the silence felt heavier than gunfire. In the war room, deep beneath an undisclosed government facility, Traoré gathered his closest commanders. The walls were lined with maps, marked with lines of red and yellow. Regions lost, villages held, zones turned gray by decades of neglect and insurgency. The room smelled of gun oil and printer ink. A single light flickered over the center table. Around him, Colonel Bako, Defense Minister Kabori, Intelligence Chief Medina Tembele, all veterans, all loyal, all waiting for his next move. Traoré didn't pace. He didn't shout. He simply stood at the head of the table, holding a small gold nugget in his palm. It glinted faintly, warm under the light. For years, he began, voice low, steady. We sold this for promises. Loans. Permission to defend ourselves. And what did we get? Armies we couldn't build, borders we couldn't patrol, and enemies we couldn't name, because they wore our uniforms. He let the silence stretch. Then, placing the nugget gently on the table, he continued. That ends now. He looked each officer in the eye one by one. We will no longer ask. We will no longer beg. We will no longer sign what we're told or wait for what we're allowed. We will buy our future with what they once stole from us. He pressed his hand over the nugget. Gold. The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to. The vow had weight, finality. And behind it, a strategy already in motion. Planes loaded, deals signed, enemies watched. Outside, the capital pulsed with quiet tension. The people didn't march. They waited. For word. For action. For proof that someone would finally stop speaking the language of fear and start acting in the language of fire. Traoré gave them that fire, and he wouldn't wait for permission to use it. The sun hadn't risen yet when the first transport touched down. Just a low mechanical whine in the dark sky, followed by the quiet thud of wheels against tarmac. There were no welcoming bands, no journalists, no political banners, only soldiers in black uniforms and rifles that didn't lower, even for a moment. The cargo plane's tail ramp dropped with a hiss, releasing a blast of cold air and something else far heavier. Silence. Waiting on the runway, cloaked in the thin morning fog, were 3 unmarked crates, each nearly the size of a pickup truck. On the sides, stenciled in bold capital letters, were words few in Burkina Faso had ever seen up close. Bayraktar TB2, fragile, do not stack. Nearby, a second aircraft rolled into position. Its cargo, smaller, more compact, but no less important. Labeled in Mandarin and military shorthand, the crates bore another message. Airborne Surveillance Kit, Module Firehawk B. Together, these deliveries marked the start of a new era. Mechanics from Ankara stepped off the first plane with duffel bags slung low and clipped toolkits already in hand. Beside them, engineers from Chengdu, clean-shaven and silent, moved with synchronized purpose. No introductions were needed. The machines spoke the only language everyone in that hangar understood now. War by precision. By 6 a.m., the hangar at Ouagadougou's southern military airbase had transformed. Cables ran like veins across the floor. Monitors buzzed. Tool carts rolled back and forth like mini battalions. The first TB2 lay across a raised platform, wings extended, as technicians calibrated its internal software and synced it to local satellite channels. Meanwhile, a Firehawk drone, smaller, flatter, and built for electronic surveillance, was being connected to an encrypted communications console. A young Burkina soldier watched intently from the corner, not blinking once. By noon, the first test simulation began. No weapons loaded, just target acquisition drills, mapping, tracking, lock confirmation. The drone's internal sensors pulsed across the base, gathering data, identifying terrain features, wind direction, signal strength, heat signatures. Every 2 seconds, a red dot appeared on the control monitor. Target locked, target locked, target locked. Captain Ibrahim Traoré arrived quietly, wearing a standard-issue officer's coat, boots still coated with desert dust. He didn't speak when he entered. He simply walked to the observation window, hands behind his back, and watched. A Turkish engineer gestured toward the screen. That red dot, sir. Your radar dish at 300 meters. The system sees it in real time, tracks it with less than 0.3 seconds delay. Traoré nodded, his voice low but sharp. And a moving human? Same delay. If marked as hostile, the system prioritizes the shot automatically. We can switch to manual override at your discretion. He turned to his intelligence officer. Assign 12 operators, top 5 from each infantry unit. I want this system functional in 2 weeks. Across town, word began to spread in whispers. Children pointed to the sky during recess. Shopkeepers paused in mid-transaction, eyes scanning the clouds. Farmers in the east said their goats startled at strange hums in the night. One elder in the city's northern quarter said it best as he poured tea into a chipped cup. The sky is watching now. By the third day, a specialized training facility had been established in the base's western wing. 24 soldiers, most under 30, were already in rotation. Inside, instructors from Turkey demonstrated launch protocols, emergency overrides, and AI-guided engagement. Chinese specialists oversaw the signal encryption station, walking local officers through firewalls and secure channels. A young Burkina recruit, call sign Nala-1, became the first local pilot to lock and track a moving convoy on a live simulation. Her fingers hovered over the fire button for 3 seconds, then released. Shot would have hit, the instructor said. She smiled, not proud, but ready. Later that evening, as dusk settled over the base and the final drone for the day was wheeled into its hangar, Traoré stood alone by the tower, watching the horizon darken. Burkina Faso didn't have satellites. It didn't have fighter jets. But now it had something else. It had eyes. Eyes that never closed, never begged, and never missed. The boot camp rose out of the Sahel like a mirage carved from willpower, a kilometer-long stretch of red soil flattened by machine, circled by fencing made of reclaimed steel and camouflaged mesh. There were no barracks, no flags waving in the wind, only a central watchtower, rows of makeshift shelters, and the relentless sound of drills echoing against the silence of the desert. The land around it was still wild, dry, and cruel, but inside this perimeter, something was taking form. A new army, engineered not from legacy, but from necessity. Captain Ibrahim Traoré had demanded the camp be constructed away from cities, far from political eyes and foreign embassies. No reporters, no ceremonies, just discipline, he'd said. And so it was. Within 2 weeks of the first drones arriving, the first class of elite operators had begun training. 27 recruits, hand-picked from infantry units, cyber battalions, and field engineers. All of them Burkina, all under 30, all sworn to silence until graduation. At sunrise, the drills began. No gun salutes, just breath, dust, and movement. One rotation learned drone strike software, sitting in repurposed shipping containers wired into mobile simulators. They practiced target tracking, heat signature identification, collateral minimization protocols. One screen showed the outline of a convoy moving through the hills. The task, identify, verify, and eliminate with surgical precision. Another group, across a dry ridge, practiced sniper integration with aerial drones. One trainee crawled prone while a drone pilot above marked wind patterns and relayed coordinates. It was a dance of inches, eyes on the ground, guided by a brain in the sky. Further out, the off-road combat unit drilled with MRAP vehicles and light assault buggies. Drivers had to navigate terrain at high speeds, react to simulated ambushes, and engage fast-moving targets with 12.7mm fire. It wasn't about power, it was about maneuvering, ambushing, surviving, hitting first. But it was in a repurposed classroom tent, shaded by scavenged canvas and lit by dusty LED lights, that something remarkable began. There, a young woman, call sign Nala-1, sat hunched over a drone console, her posture calm, fingers lightning quick. She was 24, daughter of a displaced farmer from Djibo, and until 3 months ago had never touched a computer more advanced than a cash register. Now she was the best drone pilot in the entire camp. In one simulation, she identified a mock convoy traveling through randomized terrain. Within seconds, she triangulated its path, isolated the lead vehicle, requested clearance, and executed a mock fire order. The system confirmed 90% kill probability, zero civilian footprint. The Turkish instructor looked over her shoulder and exhaled through his teeth. She's faster than some of our boys in Libya. Word spread fast. Recruits began calling her not just by her call sign, but something else. The Eye. Even senior commanders took notice. One evening, Traoré visited the camp unannounced. No formal inspection. He stood at the edge of the training ground and watched as Anala 1 executed a live tracking drill, identifying 3 potential targets, requesting satellite aid, and simulating elimination, all within 38 seconds. When it ended, he approached her console. She stood, saluted. He looked at the monitor, then at her. "You've never seen war," he said. She nodded. "Not in uniform. And yet you fight like someone who has lost everything." She didn't flinch. "That's why I fight." Traoré said nothing for a moment, then placed a hand on the console. "They think drones make us dangerous. They're wrong. Soldiers like you do." Later that night, as the trainees rested under stars dimmed by heat haze, Nala 1 stared at the drone cradle beside her, its carbon frame sleek, silent, deadly. She wasn't just flying machines. She was learning to own the sky. By the 3rd week, the boot camp dust had settled into muscle memory. Recruits no longer flinched at the shrill alarm that signaled night drills. They were already moving before the echo faded. On a makeshift parade ground lit by flood lamps and diesel fumes, Captain Ibrahim Traoré addressed 200 soldiers, pilots, snipers, convoy drivers, now bound by one idea: mastery of the first strike. He spoke without amplifier, every syllable cutting through the dry Sahel air. "No waiting. No reacting. We strike first. 1 second late is 1 coffin more." No one cheered. Discipline had replaced applause. The doctrine moved from words to sand. In a nearby valley, chalk lines marked a phantom village. Overwatch drones hovered at 400 meters, their thermal cameras painting the earth in living reds and blues. On his command, a reconnaissance quadcopter swept low, tagged 3 heat signatures, and relayed coordinates to an off-road assault unit crouched behind a dune. Within 8 seconds, the vehicles lunged forward, kicked up a storm of grit, and split into flanking arcs. A sniper team, eyes guided by real-time drone feeds, dropped prone and counted heartbeats. At the 10th beat, a simulated detonation flashed on every monitor. Convoy neutralized, no collateral. The exercise had been timed for 90 seconds. They finished in 62. Confidence swelled like thunder behind their ribs. 2 simulations later, Traoré gathered his officers under a camouflage awning ripped by desert wind. Video replays looped on a tablet, precision strikes, enemy silhouettes blinking out. Colonel Bako grinned, sweat streaking dust from his face. Yet amid the quiet pride, an older voice cleared his throat. General Kusube, decorated from earlier border wars, stepped forward, gray at the temples, eyes hard as weathered rock. "Captain, speed wins battles, but it leaves graves. These drones kill from the sky. No parley, no warning. Where is the line?" Silence stretched. Even the drone motors seemed to idle lower, as if eavesdropping. Traoré met the elder's gaze. "General, you once fought 3 months to secure a single ridge, lost 200 men, and still the insurgents returned the next season. Was the enemy merciful because we showed restraint?" The general's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Traoré's voice cooled to steel. "Peace is earned, not offered. Every day we hesitate, another village burns. I will not bury more children to satisfy a theory of virtue written in someone else's capital." He turned the tablet so the assembled officers saw a final frame. A charred convoy, time-stamped 2 days prior, an actual ambush, not a drill. They gave no warning, neither will we. A hush settled, not of fear, but of agreement sealed. The elder commander bowed his head, conceding the argument to reality. Night fell purple and vast. Above the camp, navigation lights blinked as drones rose for live patrol. No test this time. In the operations tent, Nala 1 guided her craft along a black river of sand, searching for heat traces beyond the perimeter. When the first bright ember flared on her screen, a moving pickup, too far north for a civilian route, she didn't wait for orders. She flagged the contact, marked wind speed, requested clearance, and within moments a combat drone banked toward the target. 2 minutes later, the pickup disappeared from the feed. Somewhere in the darkness, a small rebellion snuffed out before it could light its match. The camp barely noticed. Engines murmured, screens refreshed, doctrine marched on. Speed and silence, no permission, only purpose, had taken flight, and the sky itself seemed to lean closer, listening for the next command. They found him in a dry riverbed northeast of Fadangorma, bleeding, limping, alone. His AK-47 was jammed with sand, and his boots didn't match. One military issue, the other stolen from a villager. By the time he was dragged into the holding tent, hands bound, lips cracked, he wasn't spitting threats like the others. He was muttering, whispering over and over again, one phrase in broken moray. They told us where to hit. At first, the interrogators assumed it was delirium. The man was malnourished, likely concussed. But as the hours passed and the story didn't change, the phrase grew heavier, until finally one operative pressed him harder. Who told you? Names, rank. The insurgent's eyes flicked upward. He was military, spoke French like a schoolteacher, called us useful pressure. He said convoy leaves every Friday at dawn. That, some weapons are kept east of Yaga, buried in sand. He showed us maps. That's when the temperature in the room dropped. News of the confession traveled fast, faster than protocol allowed. Within hours, Traoré was watching a transcript of the interrogation in a private command shelter near Gorom Gorom. Outside, drones scanned a 100-kilometer perimeter, but inside, only one thing mattered now. A leak. A betrayal not from the battlefield, but from the command tent. Traoré said nothing for a long time, eyes fixed on the words printed in bold. Friday convoy, French accent. Coordinates matched Depot 4B. The ink was barely dry when Colonel Bako arrived, his face already pale. We pulled satellite logs. 2 weeks ago, encrypted calls were placed from inside our high command. Routed through a diplomatic line, receiver traced to ECOWAS headquarters in Abuja Traoré didn't look up. Who made the calls? Bako hesitated. General Marcel Dembélé. The name didn't surprise him. French-trained, Western-aligned, decorated, loyal on paper. A man who once toasted Traoré as the future of the nation. Now, a man whose voice might have cost them dozens of lives. Show me the footage, Traoré said. The screen blinked on. In grainy infrared, Dembélé paced alone in his office at midnight, speaking into a satellite phone. The audio was encrypted, but the pattern was enough. 3 calls in 1 week, each within an hour of a troop redeployment order. Too clean to be coincidence, too frequent to ignore. What now? Bako asked. The question wasn't tactical, it was personal. Purge the general, and the message would be clear. Betrayal means elimination. But the ripple effect could fracture an already fragile alliance of officers, many of whom were trained in the same academies. Preserve the illusion of unity, and the cancer would fester. Quiet, invisible, deadly. Traoré stood slowly, walked toward the command map. His fingers traced along the northeastern corridor, the region where the last 4 convoys had been ambushed. He didn't sell information, he muttered. He sold timing, movement, vulnerability. Bako lowered his voice. He still has a following. If you move on him, others may take it as a purge. Traoré didn't answer immediately. He stared at the blinking icons on the screen. Supply routes, drone positions, unit markers. Then finally turned. Voice cold, measured. Then let them take it that way. Later that night, General Dembélé was summoned to a logistics review at Command Post Delta. No alarms, no confrontation. Just 2 men in black fatigues waiting at the door. He surrendered without a word. In the days that followed, 6 mid-ranking officers were quietly transferred or reassigned. No trials, no speeches, just reorganization by silence. But inside the presidential bunker, Traoré felt the shift, not just tactical, but spiritual. The wall between us and them was never made of ideology. It was made of whispers. And once a whisper breaks through, it becomes a win. A win that chills, that divides, that tells you loyalty in times of war is not assumed. It is chosen or severed. The interrogation chamber wasn't a cell. It was colder than that. Sterile, windowless. 4 concrete walls and a metal table bolted to the floor. The kind of room where the truth didn't scream. It sat, waiting. General Marcel Dembélé entered with the quiet confidence of a man who'd once commanded entire battalions with a gesture. He wasn't in cuffs. Traoré had ordered none. Let him walk in like an officer. Let him walk out like a shadow. The general took his seat without being told, brushed imaginary dust from his sleeve, and stared directly at Traoré across the table. "No cameras?" he asked. "No tribunal?" "You're learning." Traoré stood by the wall, hands behind his back, not responding immediately. His uniform was clean but not pressed. His boots still caked with Sahel dust. When he finally moved, it was deliberate. He circled the table once, then sat down. A file was placed in front of him. He didn't open it. "I gave you command of 2 battalions, Traoré said evenly. "You had access to drone manifests, convoy routes, and encrypted communications. You sent 3 calls to Abuja. Explain." Dembélé smiled, not wide but cutting. "You say Gav, as if any of this was yours to give. You inherited chaos, Captain. You've just rearranged it to feel like power." Traoré didn't flinch. "Explain the calls." The general leaned forward, eyes cold. "You want to know what I said? I said we had a problem, that a boy with fire in his chest was playing war with real men's lives, that he was about to turn this country into a proving ground for foreign weapons and personal vengeance." A pause hung heavy between them. Outside, footsteps echoed down the hall. Inside, no one moved. Traoré spoke quietly, but each word landed like a drum. "You leaked coordinates, troop movements. You cost us lives." Dembélé scoffed. "I preserved options. You're building an army you don't understand, with weapons you can't control, paid for in metal that won't protect you when this collapses." "It hasn't collapsed." "Not yet." The silence that followed was sharp enough to bleed. Then Traoré opened the folder. Inside were photos, satellite images, intercepted logs, transcripts, evidence. He didn't slide them across. He didn't need to. "I should have you executed," he said flatly, "for treason, for aiding the enemy, for endangering national security." Dembélé's expression didn't change. "Then do it. Pull the trigger yourself, and know the only thing you'll kill is your legitimacy." Traoré stared at him for a long time. His fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the file, then relaxed. He stood, walked to the door, paused. "You were trained in the West, decorated for missions that never ended in victory, respected because you played by rules written outside our borders. And now, you can't imagine a world where we don't ask for permission?" He turned to face the general one last time. "You're not dangerous because you betrayed me. You're dangerous because you never believed we could win." A soldier appeared in the doorway. "Exile him," Traoré said. "No honors, no uniform. Strip him of all rank. He leaves by sundown." Dembélé stood, still defiant, but without a word. As he passed Traoré, he paused. History forgets men who refuse to compromise. Traoré didn't look at him. "No, it forgets the ones who never took a side." When the door closed, the room returned to silence. Traoré remained standing, still watching the space where the general had sat. He didn't speak, didn't move for a full minute. Because power, he understood now, wasn't just about force, it was about restraint, the ability to hold the sword and choose not to swing. The desert gave nothing back, not the heat, not the sound, not the men. When the rescue team arrived at the ambush site, there was no smoke, just ash. A burnt-out MRAP, its frame twisted like a broken ribcage. 2 armored trucks shredded by RPGs, their tires melted into the sand. The 4th vehicle was simply gone, swallowed by an IED that left nothing but a crater and the faint scent of metal and blood. 17 soldiers, gone. 1 full platoon, wiped out in under 3 minutes. The convoy had rerouted last minute, acting on what they thought was updated intel. It had come from someone inside. Now all that remained were dog tags, bits of torn insignia, and a silence that buzzed louder than gunfire. They held the funeral 2 days later on the outskirts of Ouagadougou, where the earth was still soft enough to dig. No cameras were allowed, no journalists. just rows of flags and wooden markers, each one bearing a name. Traoré arrived early and alone, dressed not in ceremonial robes, but in the same field uniform he'd worn since the night of the coup. His boots were dusted with dry soil, his face unreadable. He didn't speak to the gathered families. He didn't need to. Each mother who stood beside a grave saw something in his eyes, rage restrained by duty, pain that didn't seek comfort. When the bugler raised the trumpet, the first note cracked. No one minded. One by one, officers laid folded flags atop the caskets. When it came time for the final three, those whose bodies hadn't been recovered, Traoré stepped forward himself. He took each flag in both hands, walked to the empty graves, and placed them down with the care of someone laying a heart to rest. No one moved. No one clapped. No anthem played. Only wind, only weight, only loss. When the ceremony ended and the families were escorted away, Traoré remained. He walked the line of graves slowly, reading every name as if memorizing them for war. When he reached the end, he stopped, looked upward. The sky was blinding, cloudless, high, open. And then, barely audible, he spoke. From today, we watch first. A long breath. Then the second part. We end first. There was no one around to applaud. Just a comms officer a few meters away, catching the words by accident, not daring to write them down. But by that evening, the phrase had passed through the ranks like a blessing and a threat. We watch first, we end first. At headquarters, the drone division received orders to double surveillance rotations. Aerial operators were placed on permanent standby. Strike clearance protocols were rewritten, faster, leaner, with fewer steps between confirmation and detonation. In a hangar outside the capital, Nala 1 looked at her monitor as a new target grid blinked to life. The rules had changed. Burkina Faso would no longer react. It would anticipate. And in that shift, from memory to doctrine, from mourning to momentum, the war became something else entirely. Not defensive, not diplomatic, decisive. The intel came in at 3:17 hours. A signal intercept buried inside static, just one word repeated twice. Coup de guet, confirmed. Less than 3 minutes later, satellites picked up movement. 11 technicals, 3 cargo trucks, and what looked like a fuel tanker, all headed south along Route 9. Their destination, Outpost Echo, a radar installation built just weeks ago, positioned on a rocky plateau that overlooked 2 key valleys. If they captured it, Burkina Faso would lose real-time drone coordination over half the Sahel. Inside a darkened operations tent, Captain Ibrahim Traoré reviewed the footage with no visible reaction. He didn't pace. He didn't raise his voice. He simply pointed to the convoy path and said, "We don't stop them. We welcome them." The officers exchanged glances. Colonel Bako leaned in. "Sir, are you suggesting—" Traoré cut him off, calm but firm. "We activate Plan Scorchwind. Let them reach the gate, then close it behind them." The room shifted. Scorchwind had been drilled but never executed. It required coordination across 3 divisions, live feed drone tracking, underground troop deployment, and a timed killbox activation that left no room for error. It wasn't a defense. It was an ambush designed to look like a mistake. Orders were issued before the sun rose. All drone activity in the region ceased. Troops stationed at Echo were quietly pulled back to underground bunkers beneath the installation. A few dummies in uniform were left on the perimeter towers. Radar dishes remained in motion, broadcasting false signals to suggest full activity. Even the regular patrols were staged. MRAPs rolled in lazy circles near the base as if nothing had changed. By midday, the convoy had crossed the 30-kilometer mark. Surveillance showed insurgents sitting upright in the trucks, weapons at the ready, heads glancing upward now and then. They expected resistance. Instead, they found a wide-open gate and a hilltop base that looked, to their eyes, half asleep. At 14:02, the first truck rolled into Echo, then the second. By 14:10, the entire force had entered the base perimeter. That was when the gate slammed shut, metal shutters falling from embedded rails, the exit sealed with explosive bolts. At the same time, 4 Bayraktar TB2s reactivated from stealth mode, emerging silently from high altitude, each locked onto a target pre-assigned hours before. The first missile struck the lead vehicle. It didn't explode. It disintegrated. The shock wave folded the truck into itself, lifting it from the ground and tossing it like paper into a supply shed. Before the insurgents could react, the second drone released a scatter payload that knocked out communications. Underground, the bunkers opened. Burkina Bay Special Forces emerged from hidden hatches, infrared visors active, weapons calibrated. They swept the perimeter with terrifying efficiency. Each shot was pre-cleared, each movement rehearsed to muscle memory. It wasn't a battle, it was a verdict. Within 11 minutes, 9 of the 11 vehicles were destroyed. The fuel tanker had ignited, creating a plume visible from 30 kilometers. 2 insurgents attempted to flee on foot, but were tracked by a Firehawk drone and captured. From a hillside watchpoint, Traoré watched through binoculars as the operation unfolded. No celebration, no smile, only precision. He lowered the lenses and turned to his second-in-command. "Make sure the last 3 trucks are stripped for parts. We'll use their own steel for our next bunker." As night fell, cleanup teams moved in. Bodies were counted, weapons collected, coordinates logged. Not a single Burkina Bay soldier was lost. Later that evening, news of the victory rippled through the ranks. Soldiers didn't shout or cheer. They nodded, quietly, firmly. The system worked. The doctrine held. Speed and silence had delivered results, not in theory, but in blood and fire. And from that day forward, insurgents learned something new. Burkina Faso no longer waited. It watched. It planned. And when the time came, it ended. It began with nothing. No rumble, no warning, no sound. Just the sudden eruption of fire in the sky. The Bayraktar TB2s struck with surgical precision. 3 drones circling high above, cloaked in near-invisible altitude, their sensors locking in on heat signatures below. The lead insurgent vehicle had barely creaked to a stop before the first missile struck it like a lightning bolt from a clear sky. A split second of stillness, then metal, flame, and sand exploded outward in a violent plume. The truck vanished. Where it once stood was now only heat and wreckage. A second TB2 rolled, adjusted, and dropped its payload on the third truck in the column. The blast tore the vehicle sideways, its fuel igniting, setting the adjacent trucks ablaze. The insurgents inside had no time to radio, no time to reposition. It wasn't a firefight. It was a reckoning, delivered not by soldiers, but by shadows above. In the chaos, those who weren't hit scrambled to flee, diving for cover, some trying to turn their vehicles around. But the Berkar drone was already watching, silently orbiting at mid-altitude, calmly selecting the fastest runners. It didn't move in haste. It hovered, locked, waited. And then in calm, calculated bursts, it eliminated 2 retreating trucks with guided micromissiles. There were no misfires, no missed targets, only certainty. Farther up the ridge, the APR-40 system launched its own reply. 40 missiles, fired in under 20 seconds, arced high and fell harder. They didn't aim for vehicles. They blanketed the exit trails. Any chance of escape was now a cratered memory. The hillsides roared like thunder, had cracked open the mountain spine. Shattered rock and soil rained down into the valley as dirt roads became trenches of flame. Below, panic took over. Insurgents who had trained in ambush tactics found themselves without an enemy to face, only invisible death raining from above. They fired into the air, hoping to hit something that didn't exist in their world. Others screamed commands that were never heard. The radios had already gone silent, jammed by electronic warfare packs deployed earlier that morning. Inside a camouflage dugout near the base, a 19-year-old Burkina Bay soldier named Alain crouched beside his fire team. Sweat poured down his face, but his hands were steady on the trigger. Through the reinforced view slit, he watched the sky light up in pulses of orange and red, like the stars themselves were retaliating. His sergeant tapped his shoulder. "Orders?" Alain shook his head slowly, in awe. "No orders," he whispered. "Just reaction." A pause, then he added, almost to himself, "We're not fighting. We're watching them lose." Overcoms, a field commander confirmed. Enemy force neutralized at 78%. No Burkina Bay casualties. Drone feeds showed 5 insurgents fleeing on foot. Within minutes, 2 were intercepted by roving patrols, the rest marked for follow-up surveillance. By sundown, the battlefield had fallen silent again. But this time, it wasn't the silence of fear or aftermath, it was the silence of control. The kind of quiet that came not from absence, but from presence so overwhelming, resistance became irrelevant. Traoré stood on the ridge an hour later, eyes trained on the smoke curling into the horizon. Next to him, Nala 1 held her tablet, reviewing strike logs. 95% target confirmation, all drones accounted for. No civilian heat signatures in the radius. Traoré didn't smile, but he did nod. Heaven, he murmured, now answers to us. From the hilltops of Burkina Faso, the stars no longer looked like distant hopes. They looked like sentinels. The battlefield was quiet, save for the soft hum of cooling metal and the distant crackle of embers clinging to life. The sun had dipped low behind the dunes, casting long shadows across the wreckage. Burnt-out trucks, scorched equipment, and the twisted remains of a machine that once ruled the sky. It was the Burkina, the drone that had delivered justice from above, the silent eye that never blinked, shot down by a shoulder-fired missile in the final moments of the battle. It hadn't exploded, just spiraled downward, engine sputtering, control lost. It struck the ground with a hollow metallic groan, breaking apart in a burst of dust and shrapnel. Now it lay exposed, its carbon frame warped and blackened, one wing half buried in the sand like a fallen predator. Around it, a quiet perimeter had formed, soldiers standing in a wide circle, weapons at ease, heads bowed not in mourning, but in acknowledgement. Among them stepped Nala 1, the drone pilot who had guided it through its final mission. She wore no insignia. Her face was unreadable. Her boots left no print in the dry soil. She moved as if pulled by something greater than duty, like answering a whisper that only she could hear. In her hands was a small flag, handmade, just 6 inches wide, sewn from field rags and stitched with a single symbol, the rising sun over a clenched fist. The flag of the new doctrine, not official, not issued, but real. She knelt beside the Burkina's husk. No one spoke. She didn't touch the wreckage, only reached forward and, with care more suited for ritual than repair, she planted the flag into a crack along the central fuselage. The cloth fluttered slightly in the breeze, defiant, small, and somehow larger than the moment. Someone in the line of soldiers whispered, "She's saluting the sky." Another replied, "No, she's warning it." And that's exactly what it felt like, a statement etched into metal and silence. You shoot one eye, we grow 10. Traoré arrived minutes later, stepping through the loose ring of soldiers without needing to announce himself. He didn't question what she had done. He didn't order a recovery. He simply stood beside her, looked down at the fallen drone, and nodded once. "Let it stay here," he said, voice low. "Let them come back and see what they think they killed." That night, the image spread like wildfire, not from state media, not from an official press release, but from a satellite phone snapshot taken by a young scout and sent to his brother, then to a cousin, then to a dozen networks hungry for symbolism. By morning, the photo had reached 3 continents. A woman, faceless in silhouette, kneeling beside the broken skeleton of a war machine, a flag blooming from the wreckage like a dare. News anchors debated its meaning. Opposing factions argued about propaganda, but no one could deny what it said. Burkina Faso had lost a drone, but it had gained something far more dangerous, a story, and stories couldn't be shot down. The document was only 3 pages long, typed in French, stamped with the seal of the transitional government, and marked with a single sentence at the top in bold black ink. Effective immediately, all bilateral military agreements with the French Republic are hereby null and void. It was signed by Captain Ibrahim Traoré at 0607 local time. And with the stroke of a pen, Burkina Faso severed the last tether to its former colonial master. There was no ceremony, no anthem. The moment wasn't broadcast live. But within an hour, the news had reached Paris, and the reaction was swift. By noon, French troops stationed in the last advisory bases near Ouagadougou and Dori were ordered to pack. Cargo planes arrived that same afternoon, whisking away crates of supplies, command vehicles, and military personnel. Local residents watched from rooftops, not jeering, not clapping, just silent, measuring the moment, weighing its permanence. Then came the next blow. ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, issued a formal condemnation by nightfall. A destabilizing decision, they called it, an insult to regional unity. And with that, they triggered the standard sanctions protocol, closure of cross-border trade routes, suspension of regional development grants, and restricted access to ECOWAS banking systems. Burkina Faso was, on paper, isolated. But inside the command bunker, Traoré wasn't panicking. He was preparing. A press team scrambled to set up the national broadcast. Cameras adjusted, lights flickered. The satellite uplink stuttered, then held. At exactly 2000 hours, Traoré appeared live on every screen in the country. No flag behind him. No generals flanking him. Just a simple podium and a dusty tan uniform. His eyes met the lens like a man speaking across generations. We were told we could not survive without approval. That freedom must be rationed. That security must be borrowed. And when we began to fight back, we were called reckless, dangerous, mad. But I ask you, what is madness? Is it refusing to kneel? Or is it living for 60 years in fear of our own strength? France called us partners, but only when we obeyed. ECOWAS speaks of unity, yet punishes sovereignty. He paused, just long enough for the weight to settle. Let them close their borders. Let them turn their backs. Let them call us traitors. Because I would rather eat dust in freedom than banquet in chains. The last line wasn't in his prepared speech, but it was the only one anyone remembered. Within minutes, it was a hashtag. Within hours, it was a mural. Painted across a market wall in Bobo Dioulasso, a clenched fist rising from dry earth, holding a bowl of dust, smiling. The sanctions bit hard in the first few days. Fuel prices spiked. Black market trade bloomed. But so did something else, resolve. Markets began accepting gold dust directly in trade. Farmers organized grain-sharing collectives. Drone parts were rerouted through Russian and Chinese backchannels, skipping ECOWAS oversight entirely. Traoré didn't flinch. He didn't blink. Because he knew now, dependency wasn't broken in one act. It was broken in refusal, in saying no when saying yes was easier, in standing still when the world demanded surrender. And so, in the dust and in the heat, Burkina Faso stood taller. Not because it was powerful, but because for the first time in decades, it was truly alone and unafraid. The northern border was always dry, always restless, a no-man's land of cracked soil and wind-worn rocks, where supply trucks once crawled cautiously, headlights dimmed, radios silent, and fingers curled tight around triggers. The Sahel wasn't just terrain, it was a tactic. And for years, insurgents used it with terrifying ease. They struck like shadows. A single beat of silence before the ambush began. Old Toyota pickups tearing from behind a ridge, mounted with machine guns and courage born from chaos. They'd hit the first truck, fire blindly at the rest, and disappear into heat shimmer before the dust even settled. But that morning, it didn't go like that. The convoy came roaring through at 80 kilometers per hour. 6 vehicles, 3 heavily armored MRAPs, 2 supply carriers, and 1 recon drone rover with uplink relay support. Each outfitted with 12.7mm heavy machine guns, thermal scopes, and rotating gunners already locked and loaded. At 0642, the insurgents emerged from the northern ridgeline. 5 technicals arranged in a pincer formation. It was textbook ambush positioning. They expected hesitation, delay, the same slowness they had exploited for years. Instead, they found hell waiting. The lead MRAP didn't swerve, it accelerated. The gunner on top spun and fired without a word from command. The first truck exploded mid-turn, rounds punching straight through its hull and igniting its rear-mounted fuel barrel. Before the second truck could even reverse, a mounted grenade launcher from the third MRAP fired a single shell, dead center. The resulting blast tossed the vehicle like a toy into a dry ditch. The entire engagement lasted less than 90 seconds. From a dune 500 meters away, A lone drone operator watched it all unfold via live uplink. Her voice came through the secure channel, flat with controlled pride. Speed used to be their weapon. Now it's ours. On the ground, the remaining insurgents fled on foot. Two were captured by a fast attack rover within 10 minutes. One was injured and treated on site before being taken to a remote field hospital for questioning. The convoy never stopped moving. It reformed, adjusted spacing, and kept rolling. Just another line of dust across the red horizon. Later that evening, the strike footage was reviewed in the Southern Operations Base. The entire scenario had been logged and categorized as routine resistance neutralization. No medals, no speeches, just data, charts, and one quiet note from a logistics officer. Borders holding. Safer now than it's been in years. But those on the ground knew better. It wasn't just safer, it was owned. And not by foreign trainers or peacekeepers flown in for photo ops, not by treaties or borrowed doctrine, but by young men and women who understood speed, who no longer feared open roads, who didn't just defend routes, they dared anyone to block them. In the old days, the border was a line of hesitation. Now it was a warning. It started with a whisper and grew into a wave. By mid-morning, tens of thousands had gathered in the capital's main square. Merchants, farmers, students, veterans. There was no official parade, no marching orders, just the beating sun above, and a roar of voices below. What they carried wasn't guns or slogans. It was homemade drones, carved from wood and scrap metal, strung together with wires and painted in red, green, and gold. They held them high, symbolic wings of freedom, fluttering above the crowd. A boy no older than 12 raised a wooden drone above his head, shouting, "This one's for my father." The crowd responded, not in chants, but in cheers of recognition, each person knowing the weight those words carried. From the side stage, Traoré didn't speak. He walked through the crowd without bodyguards, shaking hands, clasping shoulders. An old veteran, leaning heavily on a carved cane, stepped forward, tears in his eyes. His medals hung rusted on his faded tunic, but his posture was upright when he took Traoré's hand. "You didn't just give us weapons," he said. "You gave us ourselves back." The two men locked eyes. No cameras captured it, but for those close enough to hear, the silence between them said more than any anthem. Far above, a drone, a real one this time, circled the crowd slowly, recording not for surveillance, but for memory. From its vantage point, the celebration wasn't chaos. It was choreography. A nation finally moving as one. And then beyond the city, across the dusty plains where tanks once stalled and convoys once vanished, came a new image, a sprawling training base, recently built, still gleaming with fresh paint and new steel. Its gates bore no foreign flag, only the Burkina colors, waving defiantly in the wind. Young recruits ran drills under open sky. Drone operators calibrated targeting systems. Medics practiced battlefield triage. Instructors, all local, barked commands with purpose and pride. It wasn't a camp. It wasn't a garrison. It was a promise that Burkina Faso would never be defenseless again, and that the fight wasn't just about borders. It was about belonging. Night and day, sleek Bayraktar and Burkar drones glide over the Sahel like silent guardians. They stream real-time video to an underground command hub, mapping every dune, every tree line, every footstep. No foreign satellite queue, no rented bandwidth, just Burkina Faso's own eyes in the sky. In the dim glow of a monitor, Aicha, a 17-year-old pilot from Djibo, tracks a hostile convoy. One keystroke, and the targets evaporate from the radar. "We see everything now," she whispers, half in awe, half in warning. An anonymous warehouse on Ouagadougou's edge hums with servers and cobalt blue screens. Here, Traoré's newest weapon isn't steel but signal. AI algorithms scrape radio chatter, predict ambush patterns, and push instant alerts to units in the field. Inside, analysts weld data into foresight, turning raw noise into lethal certainty. Voiceover: firepower wins battles. Foresight wins wars. The oath was short, but no one rushed it. Under the morning sun, a new group of recruits raised their hands. 3 fingers pointed skyward. No foreign anthem played. Only the sound of rotor blades from nearby drone pads, where swarms of sleek machines lifted into the blue like metal birds. At the border, new watchtowers gleamed, bristling with sensors, thermal scopes, and machine gun mounts. Inside command posts, young coders, some barely 14, typed lines of code into battlefield AI systems. In one village school, children crowded around a tablet. On screen was a training simulation, teaching them how to outthink a digital threat before it struck. And over all of it, Traore's voice echoed from a radio broadcast. They told us to wait, to ask, to beg. But we have gold, we have blood, we have sky. We will never wait again. By sunset, the message was clear. The war never ended. But now, it's ours to win. Burkina Faso's fictional journey from dependency to decisive autonomy is more than a tale of drones and gold. It is a meditation on dignity. The story reminds us that sovereignty begins as an inner stance long before it becomes policy. Traore's nation stops asking permission, not out of arrogance, but out of a quiet conviction that borrowed safety is never real safety. In that sense, the narrative offers a hopeful counter-image to decades of headlines painting Africa as a passive stage for foreign actors. Here the continent is an author, writing in its own ink. Yet the account is not blind to risk. Power gained through arms can easily fossilize into the very domination it once resisted. The decision to strike first, to replace patience with preemption, protects lives today, but may plant seeds of perpetual vigilance tomorrow. The moral tension is intentional. Peace, the story insists, must sometimes be defended by force, but force without foresight corrodes the freedom it claims to guard. What resonates most is the way technology and tradition meet. Teenage pilots guide unmanned aircraft while elders bless the fields below. Children learn to code battlefield AIs beside chalkboards that still teach proverbs. It is a reminder that progress need not erase heritage. It can amplify it, giving ancient hopes new instruments. Ultimately, the message is quietly radical. Liberation is a daily discipline. Whether a nation or an individual, we either live on terms set by others or dare to set our own, often at a cost, always with responsibility. Burkina Faso's choice to eat dust in freedom calls each of us to examine the compromises we accept and the futures we postpone. Question for you. If you had to trade comfort today for a chance at genuine self-determination tomorrow, where would you draw the line and why? I'd love to hear your thoughts. If this story touched you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to Captain of Truth, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching Captain of Truth.